My stepson shoved me in front of everyone and said, "That's my dad's seat. Not yours." It wasn't the push that broke me, it was the silence. After his father said nothing, the room said nothing. And in that moment, I realized I never truly had a seat at that table. So I did the only thing I could. I left. Without a word, if you believe silence can hurt louder than words. Subscribe for more real relationship stories that speak the truths we're often afraid to say. I didn't think much about the seat at first. It was just a chair at the end of the dinner table, slightly worn at the edges, close enough to the kitchen that I could get up easily if someone needed something. The first time I sat there, it felt temporary, like I was filling in for someone. Like I should stay light, unrooted, ready to move if necessary. In the beginning, I hovered more than I sat. I brought plates to the table, refilled glasses, asked about homework, laughed at stories I didn't fully understand yet. I was careful not to overstep, careful not to act like I belonged too quickly. Loving someone with a child means learning the shape of a space before you try to fit into it. You don't just enter a home, you enter a history. Over time, the seat stopped feeling borrowed. It became the place where I folded napkins while listening to his day, the place where I reached over to wipe spilled juice, the place where I reminded him to chew with his mouth closed and to say thank you. It was where I sat during birthdays, helping light candles, where I clapped the loudest at small achievements, where I stayed after everyone finished eating, collecting plates while pretending not to notice when conversations drifted into memories from before I existed in their lives. I learned how he liked his eggs, scrambled but soft, never browned. I learned he hated peas, but would eat them if they were mixed into rice. I learned that when he went quiet at the table, it meant something had happened at school. And slowly, without asking for permission, I started loving him in the quiet, ordinary ways that don't demand recognition. But love, in a blended family, can feel like walking into a photograph that's already framed. You're there, but you weren't there when it was taken. You smile carefully, hoping you don't block anyone's view. That evening, the house smelled like roasted chicken and garlic. It was nothing special, just another weekday dinner. I set the table the way I always did. His father was running late, so I called him to wash his hands. He stomped down the hallway, distracted, already irritated about something I didn't know about. Without thinking, I sat down in my usual seat. It happened so quickly I almost questioned whether it had really occurred. He stepped toward me, his small hand pushing against my arm. Not hard, not violent, just firm enough to move me. His voice wasn't screaming. It was steady certain. "That's my dad's seat. Not yours." The room didn't echo. Nothing shattered, no one gasped. It was just a sentence hanging in the air, simple and sharp. For a second, I looked at the chair as if it might explain itself. I had sat there for months. I had served from that spot, listened from that spot, cared from that spot. But in his eyes, it was never mine. It belonged to a story that started long before me. A story where his mother may have once sat. A story where his father's place was sacred, untouched, preserved. I stood up without speaking. My body moved before my pride could react. I told myself he was just a child, that children protect what feels like theirs, that maybe he was afraid of losing something else. But beneath that understanding was something quieter and heavier. I realized I had mistaken participation for belonging. I thought that cooking the meals, packing the lunches, attending the games, and staying up through fevers had slowly earned me a space. I believed consistency would turn into acceptance, that patience would soften resistance, that love steady and unannounced would eventually be returned. Yet in that small shove was a truth I hadn't wanted to face. I could care for him. I could support his father. I could show up every single day, but I could not rewrite his sense of who belonged where. It wasn't really about the chair. It was about territory, about loyalty, about the invisible lines children draw around the people they fear losing. And maybe, without realizing it, I'd crossed one. His father walked in minutes later, apologizing for being late. He kissed my cheek absent-mindedly and sat down, in Tatsiat. The one I had warmed for months, the one I had quietly claimed in my heart. I watched them from the other side of the table, father and son laughing about something from practice. The chair between them no longer empty, no longer contested. I wondered if I had imagined my place all along. Sometimes the hardest part of loving someone else's child isn't their anger. It's the reminder that your role is conditional, that no matter how much you give, there are spaces you may never fully own. And I understood then that I had never really been sitting in that seat. I had only been holding it. It wasn't the kind of shelf that would leave a bruise. It wasn't violent or wild or fueled by rage. It was small, controlled, almost casual, the kind of push someone might give when moving past a stranger in a crowded hallway. If anyone had walked in at that exact moment, they might not have even noticed. But he felt Italiano, not in my arm or his hand pressed against me, but somewhere deeper, somewhere behind my ribs, where understanding lives before words can reach it. That's my dad's seat, not yours. His voice didn't shake. It didn't crack with tears. There was no tantrum, no dramatic scene, just a statement. Clear, certain, final. And that's what made it hurt. If he had screamed, I could have blamed it on emotion. If he had cried, I could have wrapped my arms around him and told myself he was just scared. If he had thrown something, slammed a door, or acted out in a way that looked messy and loud, I could have comforted myself with the thought that children, Dante, always know how to express what they're refeeling. But this wasn't messy. It was deliberate. The push was small, but the message was precise. I stepped back, automatically. My body responded before my mind did. I remember the faint scrape of the chair against the floor, the sound oddly louder than his voice. I remember the way he immediately pulled the chair slightly closer to himself, as if securing it, guarding it. Territory, that's what it felt like. Not anger, not even disrespect. Exactly. It felt like a boundary being reinforced, a line being redrawn in permanent ink. In that brief second, I realized he wasn't pushing me physically. He was pushing me symbolically, out of a space he believed wasn't mine, out of a role he wasn't ready to give me, out of something he needed to protect. And the truth is, children are often more honest than adults. They don't soften their words to make others comfortable. They don't package their emotions in polite language. They say what they believe. That's my dad's seat. Not our seat. Not the family seat. His dad's. The emphasis wasn't even spoken, but I heard it anyway. Mine. There's something uniquely painful about being told you don't belong, not through cruelty, but through clarity. He didn't call me a name. He didn't tell me to leave. He just stated a fact as he saw it. And sometimes rejection doesn't need force. It just needs truth delivered without softness. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to respond. My mind scrambled for something gentle to say, something understanding, something mature. I could have laughed it off, could have said, "Oh, of course," in a light voice, could have tried to turn it into a teaching moment. But the weight of what he meant pressed down on me. Because it wasn't about furniture, it was about position, about identity, about who holds which place in a family. I had spent months trying to earn that space, not just at the table, but in his life. Showing up to school events, listening when he talked about his friends, memorizing the details that matter to children, offering help without forcing it, giving affection without demanding it back. I thought consistency would slowly carve out room for me. But in that instant, I understood that consistency doesn't automatically translate into acceptance. The push wasn't angry. That's what lingered with me. There was no heat behind it, no explosion, just quiet conviction. And quiet conviction is harder to argue with than loud emotion. It told me he had been thinking about this. It told me that in his mind, I was occupying a space that belonged to someone else. Maybe to his father alone. Maybe to a memory. Maybe to a version of his family that existed before I arrived. Children hold on to symbols. A seat at the table can represent stability, tradition, the way things have always been. If someone new sits there, it can feel like something is being erased. And maybe, without realizing it, he felt like I was erasing something. The hardest part was that I couldn't be angry at him, because beneath his firmness, I sensed something fragile. A fear of losing more than he already had. A quiet need to preserve what remained constant in his world. Still, understanding doesn't cancel pain. I felt small, standing there. Not because he intended to humiliate me, but because the message reduced my place to something temporary. Replaceable. Secondary. Thought about all the invisible work I had done. the emotional labor, the effort to blend without overpowering. And in one small motion, it felt like all of that was gently but firmly set aside. You don't belong here. Not in this spot. Maybe not in this role. The room didn't react. The world didn't shift. But inside me, something settled into a new awareness. Love does not automatically grant position. Effort does not automatically secure territory. And sometimes the most painful realizations come quietly, wrapped in ordinary moments. It was just a small shove, but the meaning behind it echoed far louder than any scream could have. The day I married my husband, I didn't just gain a partner. I gained a son. His name is Leo, and he was 6 years old, with big, curious eyes and a heart that was understandably guarded. Becoming well, there's no instruction manual for that. The early days were a delicate dance of trying to find our rhythm. I remember one afternoon, I tried to help him with his Lego castle. He just looked at me, took the piece from my hand, and put it in a different spot without a word. My heart sank a little. I wasn't trying to replace his mom. I just wanted to be a friend, a safe space. I realized pretty quickly that grand gestures weren't the answer. Love, in this new family of ours, would be built brick by brick, just like that Lego castle. So, I started small. I learned that he hated crusts on his sandwiches and loved extra pickles. I discovered his favorite superhero was Spider-Man. Not because he was the strongest, but because he was a regular kid who just wanted to do the right thing. I'd leave little notes in his lunchbox, a silly joke or a drawing of a superhero. Sometimes I got a small smile in return, and those smiles were like winning the lottery. Our first real breakthrough happened over a scraped knee. He fell off his scooter in the park. I ran over, expecting him to push me away, but instead, he buried his face in my side and cried. In that moment, I wasn't his I was just the grown-up who was there to make it better. I cleaned the cut, put on a colorful bandage, and we sat on the bench eating ice cream, his sniffles slowly turning into giggles. That day, a tiny seed of trust was planted. From there, things began to change. Our Lego sessions became a team effort. He started asking for my help with homework. He'd tell me about his day, the funny things his friends said, the frustrations of learning long division. We created our own little traditions. Taco Tuesdays and Friday night movie forts, built with every blanket and pillow in the house. I wasn't just his dad's wife anymore. I was becoming part of his world. One evening, he was working on a school project, a family tree. He came to me with the poster board, looking hesitant. He pointed to the branch next to his dad. "Can I put your name here?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tears welled up in my eyes. I just hugged him. All those small moments, the sandwiches, the notes, the scraped knees, the movie forts, they had built a bridge between our hearts. People sometimes talk about the challenges of being a step-parent, and yes, there are challenges, but they don't talk enough about the incredible rewards. They do and talk about the moment a little boy who was unborn from you chooses to love you, to let you into his heart completely. That's a gift I will treasure for the rest of my life. A few weeks ago, at his school's parent-teacher conference, his teacher told me, "Leo talks about you all the time. He told the class he has 2 moms, and he's the luckiest kid in the world, 'cause he gets double the love." Hearing that, it was everything. Our family isn't defined by blood, but by choice. We choose each other every single day. And Leo, my wonderful, funny, smart son, he's not my stepson, he's my son. And I'm his mom. It's a journey I wouldn't trade for anything. Thank you so much for listening to our story. If you're part of a blended family, I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories. See you next time. When I eat it, the words didn't just hang between us. They settled. Heavy. Final. That's my dad's seat, not yours. I felt the small shove, heard the scrape of the chair, but what stayed with me wasn't his voice. It was what followed. Nothing. His father was standing only a few feet away, close enough to see, close enough to understand exactly what had just happened. I remember turning my head slightly, almost instinctively, waiting for something. A correction, a gentle reminder. even a light laugh, to ease the tension. But he froze, not dramatically, not in shock. Just still. The room seemed to hold its breath for a second, and then it exhaled into silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, it's full. Full of choices, not made. Words, not spoken. Lines, not crossed. And in that silence, I heard more than the shove. I heard hesitation. I heard conflict. I heard the invisible calculation happening behind his eyes. Father first, partner second. It wasn't that he agreed with his son. I don't think he did. But he didn't disagree either. He didn't step in to say, "That's not how we speak." He didn't put a hand on my shoulder. He didn't gently explain that families make room for each other. He said nothing. And sometimes, nothing says everything. Silence can protect. It can de-escalate. It can prevent a scene, but it can also draw a boundary without ever announcing it. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just standing in front of a child, defending his territory. I was standing in front of a father torn between two loyalties, and I could see which one felt more instinctive. There's a look people get when they're unsure how to respond. It flickers across their face for just a second. I saw that look. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't dismissive. It was conflicted. But conflict without action still lands somewhere, and it landed on me. I had always known that loving a man with a child meant sharing him. I respected that. I admired his devotion. I would never want to compete with his son for priority. But partnership carries its own expectations. Quiet ones, unspoken ones. You expect to feel backed, seen, considered. When conflict arises, you expect not perfection, just presence. I didn't need him to scold his son harshly. I didn't need a lecture or a dramatic defense. I just needed acknowledgement. A simple, steady reassurance that I wasn't standing alone. Instead, there was that pause, that space where something could have been said and wasn't. It's strange how quickly your sense of place can shift. 1 second, you're sitting at the table, part of the rhythm of the household. The next, you're hyper-aware of your position, like a guest who has overstayed without realizing it. I looked at the chair, then at his father, and in that silence, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to fully admit before. There are roles in a family that are unquestioned, father, son, and then there are roles that are negotiated, conditional, still forming. Mine felt suddenly fragile. His father eventually moved, walking toward the table as if nothing unusual had happened. The moment passed on the surface. Dinner continued. Plates were served. Conversations resumed, though they felt thinner somehow. But inside me, something had shifted permanently. Because silence doesn't just avoid conflict. It can create clarity. I saw that when tension rose between his son and me, he hesitated. And hesitation, in moments that matter, reveals priority. It doesn't mean love is absent. It doesn't mean care isn't real. It simply means that when forced to choose instinctively, we return to our deepest bonds. I couldn't resent him for loving his son first, but I couldn't ignore how alone I felt in that space either. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that comes not from being attacked, but from not being defended. It's subtle, harder to explain. Because technically, nothing overt happened. No one raised their voice. No cruel words were exchanged. Yet, I felt exposed. I had stepped into a role that required courage, loving a child who didn't choose me, building a home that had history before me. I had done it gently, carefully, respectfully. And in the one moment where that effort was tested, I stood by myself. I replayed the scene in my mind later, wondering if I was being too sensitive. It was just a child. Just a seat. Just an awkward moment. But it wasn't about furniture or manners. It was about reassurance. It was about knowing that if I was going to keep standing in that space, loving, giving, trying, I wouldn't be left unspoken for. Silence can be merciful, but it can also draw invisible lines. And in that quiet dinner room, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of forks against plates and muted conversation, I understood exactly where I stood, or rather, where I didn't. I didn't plan to leave. There was no dramatic thought forming in my mind, No sudden decision building momentum. I wasn't trying to prove a point. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. In fact, part of me wanted to stay, to smooth it over, to pretend the moment hadn't cut as deeply as it had. But sometimes your body understands before your pride does. The air in the room felt different after that. Thicker. Heavy with something unsaid. Dinner continued, but I felt removed from it, like I was watching through a pane of glass. Their voices blended together, father and son, familiar, effortless. I responded when spoken to. I passed the salt when asked. I even managed a small smile, but inside, something had gone quiet. Not angry quiet, not wounded in a loud, aching way. Just a stillness settling over me, like snow covering everything at once. I realized in that stillness that if I spoke, my voice might shake. If I defended myself, it might sound desperate. If I tried to explain why it hurt, it might turn into something bigger than I intended. And I didn't want a scene. There's a certain dignity in choosing silence when your emotions are loud. Not because your feelings don't matter, but because you know that speaking from hurt rarely leads to clarity. So I placed my fork down carefully. The small sound it made against the plate felt louder than it should have. No one reacted. Conversation continued. I reached for my bag, which was resting near the counter. My movements were calm, deliberate. No rushed gestures, no trembling hands. If anyone noticed, they didn't show it. I walked toward the door, my footsteps steady against the floor. Parted from White Dead, just for a second. For someone to say my name, to ask where I was going, to tell me to stay. But no one did. Maybe they thought I needed air. Maybe they assumed I'd be back in a moment. Or maybe they didn't fully grasp what had just shifted inside me. I paused at the door, my hand resting on the handle. The house was warm behind me. Familiar. A place I had tried so hard to turn into home. And yet, I felt like a visitor. I didn't slam the door. I didn't let it close with force. I pulled it gently until it clicked shut with a soft, almost polite sound. Outside, the air was cooler, quieter. The evening sky stretched wide and indifferent above me. I stood there for a moment, breathing in deeply, as if I had been holding my breath the entire dinner. I wasn't leaving because of a child's words. I was leaving because I needed space to feel them. There's something powerful about walking away without explanation. It isn't weakness. It isn't surrender. It's choosing not to beg for understanding in a moment when it should be freely given. I could have stayed and argued. I could have demanded that his father address what happened. I could have insisted on a conversation right there at the table. But what would that have solved? If someone has to be convinced of your place, then your place is already fragile. As I walked to my car, I replayed the moment in my mind. The shove. The sentence. The silence. Each part alone might have been manageable. Together, they formed a truth I could no longer ignore. I had been trying to fit into a space that wasn't fully open, and forcing myself to remain seated in it wouldn't have changed that. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting the engine. My reflection in the windshield looked calm. Composed. No tears streaming down my face. No dramatic collapse, just quiet disappointment. The kind that settles slowly rather than explodes. I wasn't angry at the child. I wasn't even entirely angry at his father. I understood the complexity, the loyalties, the history. But understanding doesn't erase hurt. Leaving without a word was the only way I could protect what little dignity I felt I still had in that moment. I didn't want to argue my worth. I didn't want to explain why being told I didn't belong hurt me. If they couldn't see it, I couldn't force them to. The car engine hummed to life, steady and mechanical. I pulled away from the house slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of acceptance. Sometimes, the loudest statement you can make is absence. No accusations, no ultimatums, just space. And in that space, I hoped they might feel what I had felt at the table. The shift, the emptiness, where someone had been trying to belong. I didn't know what would happen next. Whether there would be a conversation later, whether apologies would come, whether things would change. All I knew was that staying in that chair after being told it wasn't mine would have hurt more than standing up. So I left, without a word. So what was it really about? It was never just a seat. It was about belonging, about the quiet roles we step into when we love someone with a past, about the invisible lines in families that don't always move just because we show up with good intentions. That night taught me something painful but important. Love is not the same as acceptance. Effort is not the same as ownership. And silence can reveal truths that words try to soften. Blended families are built with patience, humility, and courage. Sometimes you will give more than you receive. Sometimes you will question your place. And sometimes walking away quietly is not weakness. It is self-respect. Because no one should have to fight for a seat that should be offered with love.